The morning frost clung to the windows of Sunrise Café like tiny diamonds, creating beautiful patterns that caught the early sunlight. Inside, the warmth was welcoming, filled with the rich smell of fresh coffee and bacon sizzling on the grill. It was one of those perfect November mornings that made you grateful for cozy places and hot drinks. Lisa had arrived at work that Tuesday, feeling pretty good about life. She'd been working at the cafe for 3 years now, and honestly, she loved it. Sure, the pay wasn't amazing, but there was something special about being part of people's daily routines. She knew how Mrs. Peterson liked her coffee: 2 sugars, extra cream. She remembered that young Tom always ordered the same blueberry muffin before his college classes. These little connections made her day meaningful. The morning rush had just died down when she noticed him. An older gentleman sat alone at table 12, the corner spot near the big window. He was probably in his 70s, with silver hair that was neatly combed despite looking like he might not have many places to go. What caught her attention first was his jacket, an old military-style coat that had seen better days but was clean and well-maintained. She grabbed the coffee pot and walked over, giving him her usual friendly smile. "Good morning, coffee, to start you off?" His face lit up immediately. "That would be wonderful, thank you." His voice was gentle, with just a hint of southern accent. As she poured, she noticed his hands. They had that slight tremor that sometimes comes with age, and there were small scars across his knuckles, the kind that told stories she could only imagine. "First time here?" she asked, genuinely curious. He nodded, looking around the cafe with appreciation. "Just moved to town last week. My daughter lives here and she recommended this place. Said you folks make the best coffee around." Lisa felt her heart warm. "Well, your daughter has good taste. I'm Lisa, by the way. I practically live here, so you'll probably see me every time you come in." "I'm Harold," he replied. And something about the way he said it made her feel like she'd just made a real friend. Harold Thompson. She left him with his coffee and the menu, but something made her keep glancing his way. Harold spent a long time looking at that menu. He'd pick it up, read through it carefully, then set it down. Pick it up again, flip through the pages, then put it back down with what looked like a small sigh. This went on for about 10 minutes. Lisa had served 3 other tables, refilled coffee for 2 regulars, and helped train the new guy on the register. But she kept noticing Harold's quiet struggle with that menu. When she came back to refill his coffee, she saw him doing something that broke her heart a little. He had his wallet out, an old brown leather thing that was worn smooth from years of use. Inside, she could see he was counting coins, not bills, but actual quarters, dimes, and nickels. His fingers moved slowly and carefully, making small piles on the table like he was calculating something important. "Everything looked good on the menu?" she asked gently, not wanting to embarrass him but sensing something was wrong. Harold looked up at her with eyes that held a lifetime of stories. "Oh, everything looks delicious," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach those eyes. "I think I'll just stick with the coffee for now, though. Best coffee I've had in ages." That's when she noticed the small pin on his jacket lapel. It was a Marine Corps emblem, and below it a small pin that read "Vietnam Veteran." Her grandfather had been in Vietnam. She remembered the stories, the struggles, the way he sometimes got that faraway look in his eyes. Lisa made a decision, right then and there. "You know what, Harold? I've got to tell you something. We made way too much food this morning. The cook went a little crazy with the breakfast prep, and we're probably going to have to throw some away. Would you be doing us a huge favor and help us out with some of it?" Harold looked confused. "I'm not sure I understand." "Well," Lisa continued, warming to her story, "we've got this amazing breakfast special today. Scrambled eggs with cheese, thick-cut bacon, toast made with homemade bread and fresh fruit. If nobody eats it, it just goes to waste. And that makes me feel terrible. You'd really be helping us out." The old Marine studied her face for a moment, and she could see him trying to figure out if this was charity or genuine need. Lisa kept her expression as natural as possible, like this was the most normal request in the world. "I suppose," he said slowly, If it would really help you out. It absolutely would, Lisa said with a grin. You'd be doing me a personal favor. I hate seeing good food go to waste. She hurried back to the kitchen before he could change his mind. The cook, Tony, looked at her funny when she ordered the full breakfast special. Table 12 didn't order that, he said, checking his tickets. Trust me on this one, Tony. Just make it perfect, okay? While Tony worked his magic, Lisa prepared a small tray with extra butter, jam, and honey. She wanted this meal to be special. Something told her that Harold hadn't had many special meals lately. When she brought the food out, Harold's reaction was everything she'd hoped for and more. His eyes actually filled with tears, though he tried to hide it by adjusting his glasses. This is too much, he whispered. Nonsense, Lisa replied, setting everything down carefully. Like I said, you're helping us out. Besides, Maureen deserves a good breakfast. That's when Harold really looked at her and she could see he understood what was really happening. Instead of being offended, though, his expression filled with gratitude so deep it made her own eyes water. Thank you, he said simply. It's been a while since someone showed this old soldier such kindness. As Harold ate, Lisa found herself checking on him more than necessary. She watched him savor every bite, eat slowly like he wanted to make it last. Other customers came and went, but there was something special happening at table 12, and she didn't want to miss a moment of it. Harold told her about his daughter, how proud he was that she'd become a nurse. He mentioned his late wife, how she used to make eggs just like these every Sunday morning. He talked about the town he'd moved from, how hard it had been to leave his house of 40 years. Lisa found herself genuinely fascinated by his stories. Here was a man who had served his country, raised a family, lived through decades of change and challenge, and was still gracious and kind, despite whatever struggles had brought him to counting coins for breakfast. When Harold finally finished eating, he sat back with a satisfied sigh. That was the best meal I've had in months, he said. Your cook knows what he's doing. I'll tell Tony you said so. He'll be thrilled. Harold reached for his wallet again and Lisa quickly waved him off. Remember, you were helping us out. No charge for solving our food waste problem. The old Marine looked at her for a long moment, then slowly stood up. He walked around the table and gently took her hand in both of his. Lisa, he said quietly, I hope you know what a special person you are. The world needs more people like you. As Harold walked toward the door, Lisa felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the cafe's heating system. She had no idea that her simple act of kindness was about to change everything, or that someone had been watching the entire exchange with very different feelings about what had just happened. The moment Harold stepped out of the cafe, Lisa felt someone's eyes burning into her back. She turned around to see Mr. Collins, the manager, standing behind the counter with his arms crossed and a look on his face that made her stomach drop. She'd seen that expression before, and it never meant anything good. Robert Collins had been managing the Sunrise Café for about 2 years now. He was the kind of guy who always wore a tie to work, even though everyone else dressed casually. He kept a clipboard with him everywhere and had this habit of clicking his pen when he was annoyed. Right now, that pen was clicking like a machine gun. Lisa, he called out in that tone he used when he was trying to sound calm but was actually furious. Could I see you in the back office, please? The other staff members exchanged worried glances. Jenny, who worked the morning shift with Lisa, gave her a sympathetic look. Even Tony poked his head out from the kitchen, sensing something was wrong. The whole cafe seemed to get quieter, like everyone knew trouble was brewing. Lisa followed Mr. Collins to the small office behind the kitchen. It wasn't much of an office, really, just a desk crammed between filing cabinets and boxes of supplies. The walls were covered with schedules, inventory sheets, and corporate memos about following proper procedures. Collins closed the door and turned to face her. Want to explain to me what just happened out there? Lisa tried to keep her voice steady. What do you mean? Don't play dumb with me, Lisa. I saw the whole thing. You gave away a full breakfast meal to that old man. That's stealing from the company. The word stealing hit her like a slap. Stealing? Mr. Collins, I was just trying to help. Help? He cut her off, his voice getting louder. Help yourself to company property, you mean? Do you have any idea how much that meal cost? Eggs, bacon, toast, fruit. That's nearly $15. Just given away. Lisa felt her heart racing. She'd never been in trouble at work before. In 3 years, she'd never been late, never called in sick unless she absolutely had to, and had even covered shifts for other people countless times. Look, she said, trying to stay calm. I can pay for the meal myself. I didn't think it would be a big deal. The man was clearly struggling, and he's a veteran. I don't care if he's the President of the United States. Collins snapped. We have policies for a reason. You can't just decide who gets free food. What's next? Are you going to start giving away free coffee to anyone who looks sad? Free lunches to anyone wearing old clothes? Lisa felt her cheeks burning. That's not fair. This was one meal for one person who needed help. Collins sat down heavily in his chair and pulled out a folder. He flipped through some papers, shaking his head. You know what your problem is, Lisa? You're too soft. This is a business, not a charity. We've got bills to pay, employees to cover, rent to make. Every free meal you give away comes out of our profits. But it was just one breakfast. Just one breakfast today. What about tomorrow? What about next week? Collins was really warming up now, like he'd been waiting for this moment. You think I don't see how you operate? Always chatting with customers, taking extra time with people, treating this place like your personal social club. That hurt. Lisa genuinely cared about the people who came into the cafe. She remembered their names, asked about their families, celebrated their good news, and listened when they had problems. She thought that made her good at her job, not bad at it. The customers like feeling welcome, she said quietly. The customers like getting their food fast and at the right price, Collins shot back. They don't need a therapist, they need a waitress. And waitresses who give away company property don't stay employed very long. Lisa felt a cold dread settling in her stomach. What are you saying? Collins leaned back in his chair, enjoying the moment. I'm saying you've put me in a very difficult position. Corporate has been very clear about theft prevention. Any employee caught giving away merchandise without authorization is subject to immediate termination. Immediate termination? Lisa's voice came out as a whisper. You're firing me? You're firing yourself, Collins replied coldly. You made the choice to steal from this company. Actions have consequences. Lisa couldn't believe what she was hearing. 3 years of loyal service, 3 years of going above and beyond, and it all came down to this? One act of kindness toward an elderly veteran was going to cost her job? Please, she said, hating how desperate she sounded. I'll pay for the meal right now. I'll pay for it twice over. I promise it will never happen again. Collins was already shaking his head. Too late for that. The damage is done. How do I know you haven't been giving away food before this? How do I trust you around the register, around inventory? No, I think it's best if we part ways right now. But I need this job, Lisa said, her voice cracking slightly. I've got rent due next week, and my car payment. Should have thought about that before you decided to play Santa Claus with company property. Collins interrupted. I want you to clean out your locker and leave immediately. Lisa sat there for a moment, stunned. Through the thin office walls, she could hear the normal sounds of the cafe. Coffee being made, plates clinking, customers chatting. Life was going on as normal out there, but her world had just collapsed. This isn't right, she said finally. That man served our country. He was hungry and I helped him. How is that wrong? Collins stood up, clearly done with the conversation. What's wrong is taking things that don't belong to you. What's wrong is thinking you can make executive decisions about company policy. What's wrong is putting your feelings ahead of business responsibilities. He opened the office door, making it clear the meeting was over. Clean out your locker, Lisa. Don't make this harder than it needs to be. Walking back into the main cafe felt like the longest walk of Lisa's life. Every eye was on her, and she could see in their faces that they already knew what had happened. Jenny looked like she was about to cry. Tony had stopped cooking and was staring at her with his mouth open. Lisa's locker was in the small employee break room. As she gathered her few personal belongings, a spare apron, some lip balm, a paperback book she read during breaks, she could hear Collins talking to the other employees. Let this be a lesson to everyone. His voice carried clearly through the cafe. Company policy exists for a reason. We can't have employees thinking they can give away merchandise whenever they feel like it. This is a business, and we'll run it like a business. Jenny appeared in the break room doorway, tears in her eyes. Lisa, I'm so sorry. This is completely unfair. It's okay, Lisa lied, shoving her things into a plastic bag. I'll figure something out. That old man was so sweet, Jenny whispered, looking around to make sure Collins couldn't hear. What you did was right. Everyone could see he needed help. Lisa managed a small smile. Thanks, Jenny, that means a lot. Walking out of the Sunrise Café for the last time felt surreal. The morning sun was still shining. The same customers were sitting at the same tables. Everything looked exactly the same. But for Lisa, everything had changed in the span of 15 minutes. As she reached her car, she looked back at the cafe one more time. Through the window, she could see Collins wiping down Harold's table, probably calculating in his head how much money he'd saved by firing her. Lisa didn't know it yet, but her story was just beginning. Sometimes doing the right thing costs you everything in the moment but leads to something much better in the end. She had no idea that word of what happened was already starting to spread, or that there were people in town who valued kindness over corporate policy. All she knew right now was that she'd helped a hungry veteran get a good meal, and somehow that had been wrong enough to cost her job. Harold Thompson walked slowly back to his small apartment, still feeling the warmth of that incredible breakfast in his belly. It had been months since he'd eaten a meal like that, not just the food itself, but the kindness that came with it. Lisa's genuine smile and gentle way of helping him without making him feel like charity kept replaying in his mind. His apartment was on the second floor of an older building about 6 blocks from the cafe. It wasn't much, just a studio, with a small kitchenette and a bathroom, but it was clean and affordable. The walls were decorated with a few photos from his Marine days and a folded American flag in a wooden case that his late wife had given him for their anniversary years ago. Harold made himself a cup of instant coffee and sat in his favorite chair by the window. From there, he could see the street below and watch the world go by. It was a peaceful spot where he liked to read or just think about things. Today, though, his thoughts kept drifting back to that young woman at the cafe, and how she'd treated him with such respect. Around 3 in the afternoon, his daughter Rachel called. She worked as a nurse at the local hospital and usually checked in with him every few days. Hey, Dad, how was your first visit to that cafe I told you about? Harold's voice brightened immediately. Oh, Rachel, it was wonderful. The coffee was excellent, and there was this lovely young woman named Lisa, who took such good care of me. Made me feel right at home. That's great, Dad. I told you they were nice people there. Did you try their breakfast? I know how much you love a good breakfast. Harold paused for a moment, not sure how much to share. Actually, something pretty special happened today. This Lisa girl, she noticed I was having trouble deciding what to order, and she found a way to help me without making me feel embarrassed about it. Rachel knew her father's situation. His Social Security barely covered his rent and basic needs, and she helped out when she could, but Harold was too proud to accept much assistance. What do you mean, Dad? She told me they had made too much food and asked if I'd help them out by eating it. Made it sound like I was doing her a favor. Harold's voice got quiet. It was the kindest thing anyone's done for me in a long time, honey. There was silence on the other end of the line. Rachel understood exactly what had happened, and it made her heart ache with gratitude for this stranger who had shown her father such kindness. Dad, I'm so glad there are still people like that in the world. Me too, sweetheart. Me too. The phi. Next morning, Harold decided to walk past the cafe again, hoping to maybe catch Lisa and thank her properly for her kindness. But when he looked through the window, he didn't see her anywhere. A different young woman was serving tables, and there was no sign of Lisa. Curious, Harold went inside and ordered a coffee from the new waitress. Excuse me, he said politely. Is Lisa working today? She helped me yesterday and I wanted to thank her. The girl whose name tag read Jenny looked uncomfortable. She glanced around nervously before leaning in closer. I'm sorry, sir, but Lisa isn't working here anymore. She was, well, she was let go yesterday afternoon. Harold felt like someone had punched him in the stomach. Let go? What do you mean? Jenny looked around again, making sure the manager wasn't within earshot. Between you and me, sir, she was fired because she gave you that breakfast yesterday. The manager said it was against company policy. Harold's coffee cup rattled against the saucer as his hands began to shake. She was fired for helping me? I'm really sorry, Jenny whispered. It wasn't right. Lisa is the nicest person you'll ever meet, and she's been here for 3 years. Everyone loved her. Harold left the cafe in a daze. He couldn't believe that. His acceptance of Lisa's kindness had cost her job. The guilt hit him like a wave, followed quickly by anger. Here was a young woman who had shown compassion to an old veteran, and she'd been punished for it. It was wrong, plain and simple. That evening, Harold did something he hadn't done in months. He walked to the Veterans of Foreign Wars Hall downtown. The VFW was a place where local veterans gathered to share stories, play cards, and support each other. Harold had been meaning to check it out since moving to town, but he'd been feeling too isolated and sad to make the effort. The hall was buzzing with activity when he arrived. About 20 men and women of various ages were scattered around, some playing pool, others sitting at tables talking. A woman with short gray hair and kind eyes approached him. You must be new in town, she said with a welcoming smile. I'm Betty Rodriguez. I served in the Army back in the 80s. Harold Thompson, Marines, Vietnam, he replied, feeling a bit nervous. Well, welcome, Harold. Come on over and meet some folks. We're always happy to see a new face. As the evening went on, Harold found himself opening up to these fellow veterans in a way he hadn't expected. There was something about being around people who understood the unique challenges of military service and the difficulties of adjusting to civilian life. When the conversation turned to how they were all adjusting to life in town, Harold found himself telling the story of what had happened at the cafe. He described Lisa's kindness, how she'd made him feel dignified instead of pitiful, and how she'd been fired for her compassion. The room got very quiet as Harold spoke. These were people who understood what it meant to struggle, to feel forgotten by society, and to appreciate genuine kindness when it was offered. A man named Frank, who had served in the Gulf War, was the first to speak up. That's completely wrong, Harold. That girl shouldn't lose her job for helping a veteran. Damn right, agreed another veteran, a woman named Patricia who had served in Afghanistan. We've all been in situations where we needed help. Someone shows basic human decency, and she gets punished for it. Betty Rodriguez nodded thoughtfully. This Lisa sounds like someone we should know about. In a good way, I mean. The community should hear this story. Over the next hour, the group of veterans became increasingly animated about Harold's story. They talked about how rare it was to encounter genuine kindness, especially toward veterans who were struggling. They discussed how wrong it was that corporate policies could override basic human compassion. Frank, who turned out to be pretty, tech-savvy for a guy in his 50s, pulled out his smartphone. Harold, would you mind if I shared this story? I've got friends on social media who need to hear about this. Harold hesitated. He wasn't comfortable being the center of attention, and he worried about causing more trouble for Lisa. I don't want to make things worse for her, he said. Making things worse? Patricia laughed. Harold, that girl deserves to be recognized for what she did, and that manager deserves to face some consequences for his actions. Betty placed a gentle hand on Harold's shoulder. Sometimes standing up for what's right means making some noise about it. Lisa stood up for you. Maybe it's time we stood up for her. By the end of the evening, Frank had written a heartfelt post about Harold's experience. It talked about Lisa's kindness, the injustice of her firing, and what it meant to veterans when someone treated them with dignity. He tagged several local community groups and veteran organizations. Within hours, the post had been shared dozens of times. Comments began pouring in from people expressing outrage at Lisa's treatment and admiration for her compassion. Local news. Reporters began reaching out, wanting to interview both Harold and Lisa about what had happened. Harold went to bed that night feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Not just hope that justice might be done for Lisa, but hope that there were still communities of people who cared about doing the right thing. Meanwhile, across town, Lisa was sitting in her small apartment trying to figure out how she was going to pay her bills without a job. She had no idea that her simple act of kindness was about to become a rallying cry for an entire community, or that help was coming from the most unexpected places. The story was spreading like wildfire, reaching people who understood that sometimes the most important battles are fought not on foreign soil, but in the everyday moments when we choose between profit and compassion, between policy and humanity. By Friday evening, the story about Lisa and Harold had spread far beyond the local VFW hall. Social media was buzzing with shares, comments, and expressions of support. The hashtag, #StandWithLisa, had started trending locally, and people were calling for boycotts of the Sunrise Café. Local news stations had picked up the story, and reporters had been trying to get interviews with both Lisa and Harold. The cafe itself had become the center of attention in ways that Mr. Collins definitely hadn't expected. His phone had been ringing non-stop with angry calls from community members. Online reviews were pouring in, and they weren't pretty. People were calling the business heartless, cruel, and unpatriotic. Some reviews specifically mentioned that they would never eat at a place that punished employees for helping veterans. Collins was starting to panic. He'd called the corporate office 3 times that week, trying to get support for his decision, but even they were getting nervous about the negative publicity. The district manager had made it clear that Collins needed to handle this situation quickly and quietly. Saturday morning arrived with unseasonably warm weather for November. The cafe was busier than usual, but not in a good way. Many of the EY customers seemed to be there out of curiosity rather than hunger. People were whispering and pointing, and Collins could feel the tension in the air like electricity before a thunderstorm. Jenny was working her usual Saturday shift, along with 2 other servers and Tony in the kitchen. Everyone was on edge. The staff had been dealing with awkward questions from customers all week, and they were all still upset about Lisa's firing. Several employees had already started looking for other jobs, not wanting to work for a company that treated people the way Lisa had been treated. Around 10 in the morning, Collins was behind the counter reviewing the morning receipts when he noticed something unusual outside. A small crowd had gathered across the street, and people seemed to be looking toward the cafe. He squinted through the window, trying to figure out what was going on. That's when he saw them. 4 young men in military dress uniforms were walking purposefully down the sidewalk toward the cafe. Even from a distance, Collins could see that these weren't just any soldiers. These were Marines in their formal blue uniforms, the kind they wore for special occasions and official business. The conversations in the cafe began to die down, as other people noticed the approaching Marines. Customers turned in their seats to look out the windows. Jenny stopped mid-stride while carrying a tray of food, her mouth slightly open. The Marines moved with that unmistakable military precision, backs straight, steps perfectly synchronized, faces serious and determined. They weren't rushing, but there was something about their approach that made it clear this wasn't a casual visit. Collins felt his stomach drop to his shoes. He'd been dreading something like this all week, ever since the story had started spreading online. He'd hoped the whole thing would just blow over, that people would forget about it and move on to the next social media outrage. But looking at those 4 Marines walking toward his cafe, he realized that wasn't going to happen. The leader of the group was a tall, broad-shouldered man who looked to be in his mid-20s. Behind him walked 3 other Marines, all young, all carrying themselves with the confidence that came from military training. As they got closer, Collins could see the various ribbons and insignia on their uniforms. These weren't new recruits. These were experienced service members. "Oh no," whispered Jenny, who had moved to stand near the counter. "This is really happening." Tony had come out from the kitchen and was standing in the doorway wiping his hands on his apron. Even he, usually the most laid-back guy in the place, looked nervous. The entire cafe had gone quiet now. Every customer, every employee, everyone was watching as the 4 Marines reached the front door. Through the glass, Collins could see people gathering on the sidewalk outside, some with cell phones out, clearly recording whatever was about to happen. The lead Marine reached for the door handle, and Collins felt like time was moving in, slow motion. This was it. Whatever was about to happen, there was no avoiding it now. The door opened with the usual little bell chime, but somehow that cheerful sound seemed completely out of place. The 4 Marines entered the cafe in formation, their polished shoes clicking against the floor in perfect unison. The sound echoed in the now silent restaurant like drumbeats. Collins tried to compose himself, straightening his tie and attempting to put on his manager's professional smile. But his hands were shaking, and he was pretty sure everyone could see the sweat on his forehead. The lead Marine looked around the cafe slowly, taking in the scene. His eyes moved from table to table, noting the customers who were staring with mixtures of curiosity and anticipation. He looked at the staff, most of whom were standing frozen in place. Finally, his gaze settled on Collins behind the counter. "Are you the manager of this establishment?" the Marine asked. His voice was calm, but carried the kind of authority that made it clear this wasn't really a question. Collins cleared his throat, trying to find his voice. Yes, I'm Robert Collins, the manager. How can I help you, gentlemen?" The Marine didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked around the cafe again as if he was assessing the situation. The other 3 Marines had spread out slightly, not in a threatening way, but in a formation that made it clear they were there together, as a unit. "We're here about Harold Thompson," the lead Marine finally said. "And we're here about Lisa Patterson." The mention of both names sent a visible ripple through the cafe. Customers leaned forward in their seats. Jenny gasped quietly. Tony nodded approvingly from the kitchen doorway. Collins felt his face flush red. What about them?" "We understand there was an incident here earlier this week," the Marine continued, his voice steady and professional. "An incident involving a veteran who was shown kindness by one of your employees, and that employee was subsequently terminated for her actions." Collins was starting to sweat more now. He looked around desperately, as if hoping someone might come to his rescue, but all he saw were expectant faces waiting for his response. That was a personnel matter," he stammered. "Company policy was violated and appropriate action was taken." The lead Marine nodded slowly, as if he had expected that response. "Company policy," he repeated thoughtfully. "And what policy was that exactly?" "Employees aren't allowed to give away food without authorization," Collins said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. "It's basic loss prevention." "Loss prevention," the Marine echoed. "So when Harold Thompson, a 72-year-old Marine Corps veteran who served his country in Vietnam, was shown basic human kindness by your employee, you saw that as a loss that needed to be prevented." The way he said it made Collins realize how terrible it sounded. Around the cafe, he could see customers nodding in agreement with the Marine, and some were starting to look at him with obvious disgust. "It's not personal," Collins tried to explain. "It's just business. We have rules for a reason." "Rules," said the Marine. "Rules that prevent employees from helping hungry veterans. Rules that prioritize profit over compassion. Rules that punish kindness." Collins was starting to feel trapped. Every word out of his mouth seemed to make things worse, but he couldn't seem to stop talking. "Look, I understand you're upset, but Lisa knew the policy when she broke it. Actions have consequences." The lead Marine stepped closer to the counter, and Collins instinctively took a step back. "You're absolutely right," the Marine said quietly. "Actions do have consequences, and that's exactly why we're here." The silence in the cafe was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Collins stood behind the counter, sweating and fidgeting with his tie, while the lead Marine, whose name tag read Corporal Jackson, maintained his calm, professional demeanor. The other 3 Marines stood at attention, creating an impressive wall of military precision that had every person in the restaurant completely focused. Jackson reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He unfolded it carefully, and Collins could see it was covered with writing. Lots of writing. "Mr. Collins," Jackson began, his voice carrying clearly through the silent cafe. "Before we discuss consequences, I think it's important that everyone here understands exactly what happened this week. He turned slightly so he was addressing not just Collins but the entire restaurant. Harold Thompson is a United States Marine who served 2 tours in Vietnam. He earned a Purple Heart, a Bronze Star, and the respect of every man who served alongside him. When he came home from war, he worked for 40 years as a mechanic, raised 3 children, and was married to his wife Eleanor for 48 years before she passed away last year. Jackson's words hit the room like physical blows. Several customers had tears in their eyes, and Collins looked like he wanted to disappear into the floor. Harold moved to this town 3 months ago to be closer to his daughter, who works as a nurse at the local hospital, Jackson continued. His Social Security barely covers his rent and basic needs. He's too proud to ask for help, but like many of our veterans, he sometimes struggles to afford luxuries like restaurant meals. The Marine folded the paper and put it back in his pocket. On Tuesday morning, Harold came into this establishment hoping to buy a cup of coffee and maybe something small to eat. Your employee, Lisa Patterson, noticed his situation and found a way to help him that preserved his dignity while filling his stomach. Jackson's voice grew stronger. Lisa didn't see a burden or a charity case. She saw a man who had served his country and deserved respect and kindness. So she did what any decent human being would do. She helped him. One of the customers, an elderly woman sitting near the window, started clapping slowly. Within seconds, others joined in, and soon the entire cafe was applauding. Collins looked around desperately, but there was no escape from the reality of the situation. When the applause died down, Jackson continued. For this act of basic human compassion, Lisa Patterson was fired. Let me repeat that. A young woman lost her job because she fed a hungry veteran. Jackson gestured to his fellow Marines. We heard about this story at Camp Pendleton, where we're stationed. Corporal Martinez here, he pointed to a shorter Marine with kind eyes, lost his grandfather last year, a Korean War veteran who struggled with poverty in his final years. Corporal Williams, he indicated a tall, thin Marine, grew up watching his father, an Iraq veteran, fight to make ends meet. And Corporal Thompson, he nodded toward the 4th Marine. Well, his last name isn't a coincidence. Harold Thompson is his grandfather. A gasp went through the cafe. Harold's grandson was here, standing in dress blues, fighting for his grandfather's honor. The emotional weight of the moment was overwhelming. Collins found his voice, though. It came out as barely a whisper. I didn't know. Of course you didn't know, Jackson replied. You didn't bother to find out who Harold was or what he'd been through. You just saw a policy violation and acted accordingly. But here's what you need to understand, Mr. Collins. Some things are more important than policy. Jackson pulled out another piece of paper, this one much thicker. This is a petition signed by over 2,000 people in this community, including veterans, active military personnel, local business owners, and regular citizens. They're all asking the same thing: for Lisa Patterson to be reinstated and for you to publicly apologize for your actions. Collins stared at the petition like it was a poisonous snake. 2,000 people? That's just the beginning. Corporal Martinez spoke up for the first time. The story has gone viral on social media. News stations from 3 different cities have called wanting to interview Harold and Lisa. A local restaurant called the Hometown Diner has already offered Lisa a job with better pay and benefits. But wait, there's more, added Corporal Williams with just a hint of a smile. The local Veterans of Foreign Wars chapter has started a fundraising campaign to help Harold and other struggling veterans in the area. They've raised over $15,000 in just 3 days. Collins looked like he was going to be sick. $15,000? Amazing what happens when a community comes together around doing the right thing, Jackson observed. Of course, it's also amazing what happens when a business gets a reputation for mistreating veterans and firing employees for showing kindness. As if on cue, Jenny appeared at Jackson's elbow with a tablet in her hands. Excuse me, she said politely, but I thought you might want to see this. She showed the screen to Jackson, who nodded approvingly before turning it toward Collins. Your online reviews, Jackson explained. Looks like you've dropped from 4.5 stars to 1.5 stars this week. Lots of comments about not supporting businesses that punish kindness to veterans. Collins grabbed the tablet and scrolled through the reviews with growing horror. Page after page of angry comments, one-star ratings, and promises to never return. His face went from red to pale in a matter of seconds. "This will ruin us," he whispered. "That's entirely up to you," Jackson replied calmly. "See, we didn't come here to destroy your business, Mr. Collins. We came here to give you an opportunity to do the right thing." Jackson gestured toward the front window, where Collins could see a small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk. Several people had cell phones out, clearly recording whatever was happening inside. "Right now you have a choice," Jackson continued. "You can continue to defend your decision to fire a good employee for helping a veteran, in which case this story continues to spread and your business continues to suffer. Or what?" Collins asked desperately. "Or you can step up and be a leader," Jackson said simply. "You can publicly apologize to Harold Thompson for the way he was treated as a result of your actions. You can offer Lisa Patterson her job back with a promotion and a raise. And you can establish a policy that explicitly allows employees to help veterans and others in need." Collins looked around the cafe. Every eye was on him. Customers, employees, the Marines, even people outside on the sidewalk were watching and waiting for his response. "And if I do all that," he asked, "then this story becomes about redemption instead of injustice," Jackson replied. "It becomes about a business owner who made a mistake, learned from it, and chose to do better. It becomes about a community that stands up for its veterans and rewards kindness." Corporal Thompson, Harold's grandson, stepped forward. "Mr. Collins, my grandfather didn't tell us this story to get anyone in trouble. He told us because he was so grateful for Lisa's kindness. But when we heard she'd been punished for helping him, we knew we had to act. We swore an oath to protect and defend, and that includes protecting people who show kindness to our fellow veterans." Collins was quiet for a long moment, clearly wrestling with his decision. The cafe remained silent except for the distant sound of traffic outside and the soft murmur of the crowd that had gathered on the sidewalk. Finally, Collins took a deep breath and walked around the counter to face the Marines directly. What exactly do you want me to do?" Jackson smiled for the first time since entering the cafe. "We want you to call Lisa Patterson and ask her to come in. We want you to offer her a public apology and her job back, with a promotion to assistant manager and a 20% raise. We want you to personally apologize to Harold Thompson, and we want you to establish a fund to help local veterans, starting with a $1,000 donation from the cafe." Collins nodded slowly. "And if I do all that, this goes away?" "If you do all that," Jackson replied, "this becomes a story about second chances and doing the right thing, the kind of story that actually brings customers in instead of driving them away." Within an hour, Collins had made the calls. Lisa arrived at the cafe in disbelief, accompanied by Harold Thompson and his daughter Rachel. In front of the gathered crowd, the Marines and local news cameras that had appeared, Collins offered a heartfelt public apology. Lisa graciously accepted her new position as assistant manager, and the cafe established the Veterans Dignity Fund to help local veterans in need. Harold became a regular customer, and every Tuesday morning he and Lisa would share coffee and stories about the power of kindness. The 4 Marines returned to their base that evening, satisfied that justice had been served, and that sometimes standing up for what's right requires nothing more than the courage to do the right thing. Their story became a reminder that in a world that often seems divided, there are still communities willing to come together to protect kindness and honor those who have served.